the island's volcano erupted, but the authorities were hesitant to evacuate because they feared it would affect the peak tourist season, leading to a series of tragic events. The story begins with a pleasant vacation trip. Sarah's family was driving to their booked hotel on the small island of Lapel in Norway. This island is a famous tourist destination in Norway, attracting a large number of visitors each year. To catch the first rays of the morning sun, Sarah's father even spent a fortune renting a small villa near the beach. The family was deeply captivated by the stunning view of the distant horizon. However, what they didn't know was that this pleasant journey nearly ended in the loss of their lives. In a deep valley on the island, two backpackers were heading toward a crack releasing white smoke. The woman leading the group was named Marie, a geologist, and the man by her side was her partner, Hawker. They worked for the local geological bureau, specializing in monitoring the island's geological changes. The island had a dormant volcano at its center. All the land on the island had been formed over thousands of years by volcanic eruptions. Although the island's volcano had been dormant for decades, internal activity had not ceased. This morning, Marie received reports from residents that there was pungent white smoke coming from the back mountains. Marie rushed to the mountains with Hawker after receiving the call. Smelling the pungent white smoke, the sharp Marie immediately suspected that the island's volcano might be reawakening. To collect data, they entered the mountain through the crack. Not long after entering, Marie discovered something unusual. The once dry cave was now filled with water droplets, indicating that the mountain's temperature had increased significantly. Marie hurriedly took out a container to collect the droplets. However, while doing so, Hawker looked down and saw something even more terrifying. The ground was covered with dead bats. Seeing this, Marie was even more convinced of her suspicions. She used her equipment to test the oxygen levels in the cave and found that the concentration of carbon dioxide inside was 50 times higher than outside. But that wasn't the worst part. As Marie was finishing up her data collection and preparing to leave, Hawker noticed a massive crack overhead. Seeing the crack stretching for tens of meters, Marie confirmed that the island's volcano had entered an active phase. She quickly led Hawker out of the cave to report to the director. Meanwhile, in the office, the director of the Geological Bureau was reading a newspaper, deep in thought. The news reported an incident from a few days earlier where a yacht had mysteriously encountered bubbles in the sea. 7 tourists had died, and the director had assumed it was an accident, not paying much attention to it. Just then, Marie and Hawker returned with the data they had gathered and handed it to the director. Marie believed that the volcano on the island might be becoming active again. She wanted to request equipment to monitor the volcanic activity and inform the island's residents to prepare for a potential emergency. However, after looking at the data, the director thought Marie was overreacting. He believed it was normal for the volcano to have some unusual activity every day. The crack they had discovered had been there for decades. Ordering an evacuation based on just this data would have severe consequences. It was peak tourist season, and if they evacuated suddenly, the loss could amount to tens of millions of dollars in a single day. However, the director wasn't neglectful. He agreed to install monitoring equipment and instructed them to keep a close watch on the situation. Despite the director's cautious approach, Hawker felt some sympathy for him. It turned out the director had made a mistake a few years ago. At that time, the Geological Bureau staff had noticed abnormal volcanic activity and suspected an eruption was imminent. The director ordered an emergency evacuation, but after waiting for several weeks, the volcano showed no signs of eruption. Because of this, the director became the island's scapegoat. The locals still blamed him for costing them an entire summer's income. He had underestimated the volcano's power. The volcano was located at the very center of the island. If it erupted, ash would cover the entire island within 3 minutes, reaching several hundred meters high. But even more terrifying than the volcano was the large crack crossing the whole island. Once Marie realized that the island could potentially sink during the eruption, she understood just how severe the danger was. Though the director had not agreed to an evacuation, he was still concerned about the volcano's recent activity. He rushed to the hospital to collect a report on the sunken boat from a few days ago. The medical examiner had found large burns on the bodies of the deceased tourists, suggesting that the seawater temperature was extremely high at the time. However, after the police tested the seawater in the area, they found that the temperature in that section was normal. Based on the evidence, the medical examiner suspected that the incident had a direct connection to volcanic activity. Meanwhile, tourists on the island remained unaware of the volcano's abnormal behavior. They were happily enjoying various activities. After lunch, Sarah's family also went to the beach. Because her younger brother Tobias had autism and required constant supervision, Sarah didn't dare wander too far. She gazed longingly at the nearby volleyball game. Her father noticed Sarah's hesitation and promised to look after Tobias so she could go enjoy herself. With her father's reassurance, Sarah's mood brightened, and she happily went to join the game. However, shortly after Sarah left, her father Frederick noticed that his wife was being approached by a stranger, which made him a little uncomfortable. But just as he looked up, Tobias, who had been swimming alone in the pool, was nowhere to be found. Frederick quickly realized that his son was missing and began searching frantically. When Sarah heard that Tobias was lost, she immediately left the game. The family searched the beach, and just as Frederick was growing anxious, a tourist told him that a boy matching Tobias's description was seen on the rocks nearby. Upon hearing the tip, Frederick turned around and saw Tobias on the rocks. When he saw this, Frederick hurriedly ran over, but when they reached the rocks, the family noticed something strange. There were sea turtles everywhere in the water. The turtles seemed to be migrating, and tourists were drawn to them. Since the island had a turtle habitat, no one thought much of it. Meanwhile, at the Geological Bureau, Jingjia had analyzed the samples they had collected earlier. She found that the water droplets in the crack didn't contain many minerals, suggesting that the water wasn't seeping from the soil but rather had evaporated from the air due to temperature changes in the cave. To collect more data, Marie and Hawker drove to the volcano's crater. She planned to install several detectors near the volcano's rim. The instruments would alert them immediately if there were any geological movements, but as they reached halfway up the mountain, Marie discovered a new crack in the middle of the mountain. Hawker used the measuring instruments and found that the crack was 5 centimeters wide, and there were signs of subsidence around the area. Marie set up the equipment near the crack. As soon as the instruments were activated, the base received data. The staff looked up and saw a terrifying scene. Hearing the screams, the director quickly arrived in the hall. He saw that the internal temperature of the mountain was rapidly rising and realized that the volcanic activity was intensifying. He hastily called Marie and urged them to evacuate. But before he could finish his sentence, thick white smoke suddenly emerged from the crack. Seeing the white smoke, Marie understood that the pressure beneath the volcano was rapidly changing. If the volcano erupted now, the consequences would be unimaginable. Realizing the danger, the two of them hurriedly ran down the mountain. Not long after escaping, Marie encountered several tourists climbing the mountain. She shouted for them to evacuate immediately, but before she could finish, a large amount of white fog rushed down with the wind, instantly engulfing the group. In the panic, Marie went in the wrong direction and accidentally fell down the slope. Fortunately, Hawker didn't abandon her. With the help of several tourists, they managed to rescue the unconscious Marie, but Hawker had inhaled too much toxic gas and fell into a coma. When Marie woke up again, she found herself in the hospital. When Marie woke up, the first thing that came to her mind was that the volcano was about to erupt. She thought the mayor had already notified the tourists and residents on the island to evacuate, but when she arrived outside the hospital room, she discovered that there had been no evacuation notice on the island. At that moment, Marie saw the mayor sitting on a bench outside the hospital room. When the mayor saw that Marie was okay, he waved for her to come over. It turned out that the volcano hadn't erupted yesterday. The mayor carefully compared the data and realized that yesterday's white mist was just the volcano releasing pressure. The pressure had been released through the cracks, and the volcano's pressure had been reduced to a safe level, so the mayor didn't issue an evacuation order. After hearing the mayor's explanation, Marie could no longer tolerate it. As a geologist, she knew full well that, once a volcano releases pressure, it means the volcano has entered the eruption phase. The cracks at the top of the mountain could never release all the pressure. Marie urged the mayor to issue the evacuation order quickly, or it would be too late if the volcano erupted. However, despite Marie's persuasion, the cautious mayor still disagreed. It turned out that due to a blunder a few years ago, the mayor was worried about a repeat of the same fiasco. He wasn't worried about being fired, but about the cost of evacuation, which they couldn't afford. Looking at the bills on the mayor's computer, Marie was shocked. Although she knew the evacuation would be costly, Marie still insisted on her opinion. The volcano was about to erupt, and she demanded that the mayor notify the entire island. If the mayor remained indifferent, Marie would publish the news online. Even if the volcano didn't erupt, she would rather take all the blame. Unable to convince him, the two had an argument in the hallway. Finally, the mayor came up with a compromise. He took Marie to the town hall to meet the mayor's secretary. However, when the secretary heard about the impending eruption, her attitude was just like the mayor's. Even more absurd was that the secretary's concerns were the same as the mayor's. The island's residents didn't care about data. As long as the volcano wasn't emitting smoke and the ground wasn't shaking, no one would evacuate. Seeing the two numb people, Marie was left speechless, but she still insisted on releasing the news. After thinking for a while, the secretary came up with a compromise. She suggested that they first publish the data in the newspaper, informing the public about the potential eruption. Then, based on daily data, they could assess whether evacuation was necessary. This way, the residents would be prepared in advance, and evacuation would be easier when the time came. Reluctantly, Marie agreed to this plan. Meanwhile, Sarah was chatting with her new friend Charlie on the beach. They had planned to organize a volleyball game later, but when Sarah checked her phone, Charlie unexpectedly noticed that the video on Sarah's homepage was of yesterday's game with everyone. The video had an extremely rude title, and it turned out that the boy who had played with them yesterday secretly filmed the video because he thought Charlie was attractive. When Sarah opened her phone, she saw the video, and Charlie assumed Sarah and the boy were in cahoots. She angrily left the scene. The sudden incident left Sarah at a loss. She wanted to explain, but Charlie had already walked away. Feeling upset, Sarah turned back to the hotel, but as soon as she returned to her room, Sarah heard her parents arguing about trivial matters. Her father was unhappy about her mother chatting with a stranger the day before. The argument grew more intense, and they said many things about the two children. Hearing her father's complaints, Sarah, already annoyed, became even more upset. She contacted her uncle Jens and asked him to help her book a ticket to leave. Hearing that Sarah was feeling down, Jens guessed that her sister Jennifer and Frederick had argued again. He tried calling to check, but Jennifer's phone was on mute, and she hadn't noticed. Unable to reach his sister, Jens went ahead and booked the ticket for Sarah. While Sarah was packing her luggage, the Geological Bureau's alarm suddenly went off. Marie went to the lobby, only to see a terrifying scene. Looking at the rapidly rising pressure readings, Marie sensed that the volcano would erupt in a few hours. She urged the mayor to issue the evacuation order immediately, or it would be too late. The mayor realized the seriousness of the situation and immediately asked his assistant to notify the mayor. Once it was confirmed that the volcano would erupt, the mayor immediately issued the evacuation notice. However, no one noticed that a passenger plane was on the runway beneath the volcano. Upon learning about the eruption, the pilot wanted to abort the takeoff, but the plane had already left the runway and couldn't land. The pilot had to increase power, hoping to gain altitude before the eruption. Just then, the volcano suddenly erupted. Seeing the thick smoke ahead, the pilot tried to turn, but the eruption came too suddenly, and the speed was too fast. It was too late to turn. The pilot could only try to avoid the volcanic ash, but all the efforts were in vain. The plane was engulfed by the ash and disappeared into the smoke. The next second, the burning plane dove downward. When Frederick and Jennifer, who were arguing, saw the eruption, they also sensed something was wrong. Jennifer took out her phone to notify Sarah and Tobias to prepare to evacuate, but when she opened her phone, Jennifer saw that Jens had sent her a message saying Sarah had boarded a plane and left. Seeing the message, Jennifer was stunned. She hurriedly got into the car with Frederick and rushed to the plane crash site. By the time they arrived, the rescue team had already arrived, and kind-hearted tourists were also helping with the rescue. Fortunately, when the plane crashed, the pilot made an emergency landing, and most of the passengers survived. Jennifer searched everywhere for her daughter but couldn't find any trace of Sarah. From the rescue workers, the couple learned some unfortunate news. A few passengers in the front seats had still not been found. Jennifer took the list and found Sarah's name on it. Upon seeing the list, the couple collapsed. They dejectedly returned to the hotel, preparing to wait for the retrieval of Sarah's body. But when they got back to the hotel, they saw Sarah sitting on the sofa, watching TV with Tobias. It turned out that Sarah had indeed boarded the plane, but just as it was about to take off, she couldn't stop worrying about her brother. While Sarah was hesitating whether to leave, Charlie sent an apology message. It turned out that Charlie had realized the video was not posted by Sarah. After realizing she had wronged Sarah, Charlie sent the apology. Seeing the message, Sarah, still concerned about Tobias, decided to return. When her parents saw that she was fine, they sighed in relief. Sarah found Charlie and told her about how the message saved her from a possible disaster. When Charlie realized that her message had saved Sarah's life, she was surprised. The two looked at each other, and the atmosphere became somewhat awkward, but the family had no idea that an even more terrifying disaster was waiting for them on the island. The head of the Geological Bureau simulated the consequences of the eruption. The results from the simulation software were very bad. The eruption would affect the entire island. The head of the Bureau suggested evacuating everyone overnight, but the politicians at the town hall were still hesitating. It turned out that after the volcano erupted at noon, it calmed down, and the politicians believed that the simulation software couldn't be that accurate. The first eruption had relieved most of the volcano's pressure, and maybe it would enter a brief dormancy. Seeing that the mayor insisted on not evacuating, the head of the bureau had no choice but to start evacuating the people at the Geological Bureau. Upon receiving the evacuation notice, Marie returned home, preparing to leave with her brother, but to her surprise, her brother had been arrested by the police for causing a disturbance after drinking. Marie informed the police about the volcanic eruption and wanted them to evacuate first before handling the situation. Marie was upset that the police hadn't received the evacuation notice, and she argued with the agent. Unexpectedly, the agent released her brother but arrested Marie for spreading rumors. Fortunately, after the volcano erupted once during the day, there was no further activity, and everyone thought the volcano would not erupt again. They relaxed their vigilance. However, some worried tourists chose to leave the island overnight, just as the islanders thought everything was fine. Jens, who was fast asleep, suddenly received a call from his colleague at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The colleague urged Jens to come to the office immediately as the situation with the volcanic eruption was becoming serious. Jens rushed to the office and found that it was already packed with people when he arrived. It turned out that after the last eruption, a crack more than 200 meters long appeared on the island, cutting through the entire island. This eruption had caused changes to the island's geological structure, and the cracked area might slide into the sea. The Spanish Geological Bureau predicted that the landslide caused by this eruption might trigger a tsunami, but that wasn't the worst part. If the rockfall caused another eruption, the level of disaster would increase. Since it was a simulation test, the Norwegian Prime Minister was unsure and worried about causing public panic. The Prime Minister requested that the authorities evacuate the residents secretly and keep the news under wraps. Seeing the simulation results, Jens was stunned. He suddenly realized that his sister Jennifer's family was still on the island. After the meeting, Jens immediately went back to the office. He checked flights to La Palma, but he found that all flights in the area had been cancelled. He then checked ferries and discovered that even the ferries had bypassed this region. Clearly, the major companies had already received the warning in advance. While Jens was unsure what to do, he discovered that a ferry from a nearby small island to La Palma was still operating. The ferry would depart in 20 minutes, and Jennifer, who was vacationing on the island, had no idea that disaster was approaching. After yesterday's accident, Jennifer felt she hadn't been considerate enough of Sarah's feelings. To make up for her years of guilt, she decided to take better care of her daughter. The mother and daughter changed into swimsuits and went to the pool. Just as Jennifer was about to get in the water, she received a call from Jens. Jens informed her that the volcanic eruption wouldn't stop and that the next eruption was imminent. He urged Jennifer's family to escape quickly. Upon hearing Jens' warning, Jennifer realized how serious the situation was, and the family hurried back to the hotel to pack their bags. While packing, Sarah suddenly remembered Charlie. She went to Charlie's room to invite her to leave with them, but Charlie was nowhere to be found, and her phone wouldn't connect. Sarah wanted to search for her, but Jennifer felt they didn't have time. Under her mother's urging, Sarah had to leave the hotel. However, when they reached the hotel entrance, they discovered that all the waiting taxis had disappeared. It turned out that after yesterday's plane crash, the taxis had gone to the hospital. At that moment, Frederick noticed a van nearby with the engine still running. The driver was unloading cargo, and Frederick signaled the family to get in. Seeing people stealing his van and unloading the cargo, the driver rushed after them. Fortunately, Frederick was quick, and before the driver could catch up, he had already driven away. They sped down the road for a few minutes and quickly reached the pier. Just as they were about to get out of the van, Frederick noticed that the driver was still chasing them. Frederick told Jennifer to take the children and leave, while he would handle the trouble and catch up with them. As soon as Frederick got out of the van, the angry driver beat him up. Frederick explained that he had stolen the van due to an emergency at home. Upon hearing that Frederick had stolen the van just to get to the pier, the driver was speechless. It turned out that the pier was only 3 kilometers from the hotel. Taking a shortcut and walking up some stairs, they could have arrived in 5 minutes. Frederick felt that the beating had been in vain. After paying compensation, Frederick rushed to the pier, but he was too late. The ferry had already left. Frederick had no choice but to watch his family leave without him. Meanwhile, Charlie, who was relaxing by the sea, noticed missed calls on her phone. She returned the call, and Sarah urged Charlie to leave the island quickly as the volcano was about to erupt again, possibly causing a tsunami. However, before Sarah could finish her warning, the ground suddenly shook. The tourists on the island realized that the volcano was erupting again when they saw smoke billowing from the crater. Everyone rushed to the pier, trying to evacuate, but then they realized there were no more ferries. Frederick, who hadn't left with his family, met a man he had met at the bar in the crowd. With the man's help, Frederick managed to board another boat. However, just as the boat was about to leave, a woman came to the pier holding her child. She begged the men on the boat for a spot, asking them to take her child if no one helped her. Moved by the woman's plight, Frederick stood up and gave his spot to her. Everyone on the ferry looked at Frederick with admiration. After leaving the pier, Frederick wanted to check if there were any evacuation efforts in the town. However, after looking around the streets, Frederick found that the officials had already fled. Helpless, he called his wife to take care of the two children. Meanwhile, the Geological Bureau's monitoring equipment sent data from the volcano, revealing that the internal pressure was rapidly increasing. The director made a call to the mayor, requesting him to issue an evacuation order immediately. The recent eruption was just the beginning. The mayor, having witnessed the volcanic eruption, did not dare to delay. He sounded the alarm, and the entire island was filled with evacuation notifications. The director had just finished his report when he saw Hawker enter the office. It turns out that the noise from the eruption had woken Hawker, who had been unconscious earlier. As a staff member of the Geological Bureau, Hawker didn't forget his responsibilities. He immediately rushed back to the bureau. The director wanted Hawker to evacuate first, but Hawker regretfully informed him. When he woke up, the doctors and nurses were nowhere to be found. Now, it's too late to leave. Meanwhile, Marie's brother heard the alarm. He went outside and found that the streets were crowded with people. Upon seeing the volcano spewing smoke again, he rushed to the police station, but the female officer on duty hadn't received any evacuation orders and was reluctant to release anyone. Just then, a male officer rushed in, shouting about the eruption and urging the female officer to evacuate immediately. Upon hearing the notice, the female officer's attitude changed instantly. She dropped the keys and left the station with the male officer. Marie's brother picked up the keys and unlocked Marie's cell. As he was opening the door, Marie's brother noticed another prisoner in the adjacent cell, so he quickly unlocked that door as well. As the two were leaving the prison, they bumped into Frederick, who was wandering the streets. Frederick said the boats on the island had already left, and it was too late to reach the dock. Seeing Frederick's disappointment, Marie's brother mentioned that he had a speedboat docked at the back of the mountain and invited Frederick to join them. Hearing that there was still a boat, Frederick's gloom lifted immediately. The three quickly reached the shore. Fortunately, Marie's brother had hidden the boat in a secluded spot, and no one had discovered it. However, just as they were preparing to board, the man who Marie's brother had released from prison earlier appeared behind them. Seeing the man holding a gun, Marie's brother thought he wanted to join them and generously invited him along, but the man insisted that they all leave. He wanted the whole boat. Upon realizing the man intended to steal the boat, Marie's brother wasn't willing to back down. He charged at the man, and a struggle broke out. During the tussle, the man's gun accidentally went off and hit Marie's brother. Seeing this, Frederick did not hesitate. He tackled the man and fought him in the water. After a brutal struggle, he knocked the man out with a rock. At that moment, the man's accomplices arrived. Frederick grabbed a gun from the water to hold off the incoming attackers. He quickly led Marie onto the boat and fled the island. Meanwhile, Jennifer and the others, who had left earlier, managed to catch the last flight. But just as they were about to board, Sarah saw Ellie in the crowd behind them. She told her mother to board first, promising to catch up quickly, because Charlie hadn't booked a ticket in advance. She was stuck at the airport, waiting. Sarah gave Charlie her father's boarding pass, but when the plane was about to take off, Jennifer realized that Sarah still hadn't boarded. In a panic, Jennifer had no choice but to leave the plane with her son. However, Jennifer didn't notice that Charlie and Sarah had already squeezed onto the plane, missing each other in the process. On the island, the director and Hawker arrived at the volcano's crater, which was about to erupt. Staring at the molten lava, the director was full of regret. If he had acted more decisively earlier, perhaps everyone could have evacuated by now. But now, regretting it was useless. Hawker took out a bottle of red wine. Just as they were about to drink, the ground suddenly shook. The volcanic eruption caused the crack on the west side of the island to finally give way. Millions of cubic meters of sand and soil surged into the sea, instantly generating a massive wave. Meanwhile, on the plain, Sarah, unable to find her mother, called Jennifer. Upon hearing that her daughter had boarded the plane, Jennifer was filled with despair, but at that moment, the plane began to taxi, and as Jennifer struggled with what to do, an even worse piece of news came in. The eruption had triggered a tsunami, and a wave dozens of meters high was heading their way. Seeing the news, Jennifer knew they were doomed. She told Sarah to live life to the fullest, but just as Jennifer was saying goodbye to her daughter, everyone's phones suddenly received a message. The message contained coordinates to a safe zone on the opposite side of the island. It turned out that a geologist had predicted that although the tsunami was terrifying, the island's shape and structure could block some of the tsunami's impact. This safe zone could provide shelter for the people stranded on the island. Upon hearing about the safe zone, Jens ignored the Prime Minister's objections and sent the coordinates to everyone in a message. Travelers who received the message rushed toward the coordinates. Meanwhile, the tsunami, dozens of meters high, was already approaching the island. Seeing the terrifying wave, the pilot had no choice but to push the engine to full power, but he had severely underestimated the speed of the tsunami. At the same time, Frederick also received the message the tsunami was right behind them. He dared not stop, pushing the engine to full power, quickly heading toward the safe zone. But just as they reached the safe zone, another tsunami appeared. The terrifying wave trapped them in between. Just when Frederick and Marie thought they were doomed, the speedboat finally reached the entrance. Seeing the two waves crashing together, Marie's anxious heart was finally relieved. Frederick drove the speedboat onto the shore, where a group of survivors had already gathered. The survivors, thankful to be alive, exchanged smiles. Just then, Frederick heard someone calling his name. He turned around and saw Jennifer and her son. Meanwhile, at the airport, Sarah woke up from unconsciousness. It turned out the airport was located on the northwest side of the island, and the majority of the tsunami's impact had been absorbed by the mountain. The plane had only been pushed off the runway. Sarah stepped outside and was completely stunned by the scene before her. At that moment, the authorities' rescue team finally arrived, albeit late. With the help of the rescue team, the survivors were moved to the safe zone. As soon as Sarah got off the plane, she spotted her parents in the crowd. The family, grateful to be alive, embraced each other.